The Ashes of Neretza. At dusk, when the red light of the dying sun clung to the towers like blood on polished steel, Darren sat in the western gate of Neretza and watched the city pretend to be beautiful. From a distance it always was. The domes blushed gold in the evening. The upper terraces, stacked with gardens and marble fountains, caught the last light like bowls of fire. Silk banners streamed from the homes of merchants and magistrates. The high walls shone pale as bone. Caravans still arrived at sundown from the southern roads, and musicians still played in the wine courts. A stranger seeing it from the plain would have thought Neretza blessed above every city in the valley. Darren knew better. He had lived there 16 years and never once forgotten that the place was rotting from the center outward. Rot, he had learned, often wore perfume. Rot sang. Rot traded in the market, judged in the square, and bowed in the temples with clean hands and cruel hearts. He was not born there. Men in Neretza never let him forget it. He had come as a younger man with flocks, servants, wagons, and hope, following fortune into the fertile basin watered by 5 streams. The land had seemed lush, the commerce rich, the walls secure. His wife, Selah, had loved the bright fabrics and busy streets. Their daughters, Mara and Elin, had grown beneath the city's shadow from children into women. Darren had prospered enough to be tolerated and aged enough to be ignored. Still, no matter how many taxes he paid or disputes he settled or grain levies he fulfilled, he remained what they called him when they wished to wound him, the outsider. That evening, as the marketplace emptied and shadows stretched long over the paving stones, he saw 2 travelers approaching from the western road. They did not look like merchants or pilgrims. They carried no wares, wore no clan colors, and yet there was something in the way they walked that made the air around them seem sharper. Dust clung to their cloaks, but not in a common way. It was as if the road had touched them and not owned them. Their faces were grave, their eyes steady, and though they looked like men, something about them made Darren rise to his feet before he understood why. He bowed low. "My lords," he said, the old courtesy leaving his mouth before thought, "the square is no place to spend the night. Come to my house. Water shall be brought for your feet, bread prepared, and you may rise early and go your way in safety." The taller of the 2 regarded him. "We will remain in the square." The words were simple, but Darren felt cold move through him. The square at night belonged to the city in its truest form. There were places in Neretza that still wore law by day, but once darkness entered, the mask fell away. He forced a smile and bowed again. "I beg you, do not do so. I know this city. I know its ways. Honor me by accepting shelter." The travelers exchanged a glance, as though weighing more than hospitality. At last the other one inclined his head. "We will come." Darren led them quickly through the streets, his chest tight with urgency he did not care to explain. Above them, lanterns were being lit one by one. In the balconies women leaned on carved rails and watched. Boys ran shouting after one another between the columns. Somewhere a drunk laughed too loudly. Somewhere else a woman screamed once and then no more. His house stood on a narrower street near the lower quarter, built around a small inner court where a fig tree pushed stubborn roots through old stone. It was not grand, but it was orderly. Selah had made it so. Even now, with worry etched permanently around her mouth, she kept the lamps trimmed, the linens folded, the copper polished. She believed in the dignity of surfaces. When Darren entered with the strangers, she rose in alarm from the meal table. "Guests," he said quietly. "Prepare water. Quickly." She studied his face and saw what he did not say. Her mouth thinned, but she turned at once to call for basins and towels. Mara came from the kitchen with flour on her hands. Elin followed carrying a jar of oil. Both daughters moved with the nervous grace of those who had learned to keep silent whenever men's voices grew serious. The guests washed. Bread without leaven was set before them, still warm from the stone oven. Lentils, olives, herbs, goat cheese, and a little wine. Darren insisted they eat. As they reclined in the lamplight, the house seemed briefly like what homes are meant to be, a place where walls keep out danger, where shared bread binds strangers to peace. The fig leaves stirred in the court. The sky above darkened from purple to indigo. Then came the first pounding on the outer door. Everyone froze. Another blow shook the wood. Then another. Voices rose outside, many voices, shouting over one another until they became a single living noise. Selah went pale. Mara set down the pitcher so quickly it cracked on the floor. Elin covered her mouth. Darren stood slowly. The taller traveler looked toward the door, not startled, only saddened, as if hearing something expected. They have come quickly. Darren's throat tightened. Stay inside. The pounding became a battering. Fists, boots, perhaps stones. Then came the cries. Open. Foreigner. We saw them go in. Bring out the men. The whole street seemed alive now. The voices of the young, the old, the drunken, the eager. Darren knew them. Bakers, watchmen, sons of officials, traders from the dye market, apprentices, men who nodded to him by day. The city had emptied itself at his threshold. He moved to the door before Selah could stop him. Do not go, she whispered. I must. He slipped out and pulled the door shut behind him. Torches flared in the narrow lane. Their smoke crawled upward between the walls. Men pressed shoulder to shoulder so densely that Darren could not see the end of them. Faces glowed red and black in the light. Some grinned. Some sneered. Some wore the blank expression of men who take courage from a crowd and cruelty from each other. At their front stood Joram, butcher's son turned tax collector, thick-necked and heavy-eyed. You entertain strangers, Darren, Joram called. The whole city is honored. A ripple of laughter spread. Darren raised both hands. Neighbors. Friends. Do not act wickedly. They are guests under my roof. A man farther back spat. Since when do foreigners teach Neretza about wickedness? Another shouted, bring them out. The crowd took it up. Bring them out. Bring them out. Darren stepped in front of the door, though he knew how useless the gesture was. They have done you no harm. Go back to your homes. Joram smiled slowly. You came here with caravans and silver and now you sit in the gate and judge us. Who made you lord over Neretza? Voices answered with curses. Darren felt the old shame rise, the shame of living years among men who never accepted him and still needing something from them. I ask only this. Leave these men in peace. He did not know at what point fear drove him into madness, only that the next words left his mouth and could never be called back. I have daughters, he said hoarsely. They are unwed. Take them instead. But do not lay hands on my guests. Silence fell so suddenly it rang in his ears. He heard, behind the door, a stifled cry. Selah. Or Mara. Or Elin. For a heartbeat even the mob seemed startled by what he had offered. Then Joram laughed, one short bark of disbelief, and others laughed with him. We will have all three, someone shouted. The crowd surged. They slammed into Darren and nearly crushed him against the door. Wood groaned. Fingers clawed for the latch. A stone struck the wall beside his head. Someone seized his robe and tore it. He shouted, pushed, stumbled. Then the door opened from within, and strong hands caught his arms. He was pulled backward into the house just as the bar dropped into place. Before the mob could break through, a light burst from the travelers that was not lamplight and not fire. It flashed through the cracks of the door and the lattice and the courtyard opening like white judgment. Outside came cries of pain, confusion, and terror. Men began cursing, stumbling, crashing into each other and the walls. My eyes. The door, where is the door? Hold the torch higher. The lane filled with blind panic. Their blows turned random, weak, desperate. Darren, sprawled on the floor, stared up at the strangers with breathless horror. They were no common men. The taller one bent over him. "Do you have any others here? Sons, daughters promised in marriage, kin of your house?" Darren swallowed. "2 men. My daughters are betrothed." "Bring them out," the other said. "This city is finished. Its violence has risen before the Most High, and we have been sent to see its end." Selah made a sound like a wound opening. "No," she whispered. "No." But Darren had already risen. He looked once at Mara and Elin. Their faces were white with shock, with the knowledge of what he had nearly done to them. He wanted to speak, to beg forgiveness, to say that terror had turned his heart into something monstrous, but there was no time and perhaps no excuse in all the world large enough for that shame. He took a cloak and ran into the night. The lane outside was chaos. Men groped at walls and shouted at shadows. Some crawled on hands and knees, searching for the house they could no longer find. Others struck out blindly at one another. One stumbled against Darren and did not know him. He made his way through twisting streets to the district where his daughter's betrothed lodged above a wool merchant's hall. The young men, Tuvin and Asher, were friends since childhood, clever, ambitious, eager to marry into his household not for love alone but for whatever small standing it gave them. He hammered at their door until a servant opened with a scowl. Tuvin appeared half-dressed, wine-flushed and annoyed. Asher behind him carried a cup and grinned sleepily. "Darren?" Tuvin said. "What lunacy brings you here?" "You must come now," Darren said. "Wake your houses. Take nothing. The city will be destroyed before morning." Asher laughed outright. "Destroyed? By whom?" "Debt collectors." Darren grabbed him by the arm. "Listen to me. This is no jest. Messengers have come. Judgment is at the threshold." Tuvin gently removed Darren's hand from Asher's sleeve. "You frightened yourself with desert tales. Go home. Bolt your door and sleep. Please." Something in Darren's voice made them falter, but not enough. They looked at one another, and in that glance he saw the fatal thing, the confidence of men who believe walls, wealth, and normalcy are stronger than any warning. Asher lifted his cup in mock salute. "If heaven means to burn Neretza, let it wait until after the wedding." Tuvin smiled with embarrassed pity. "Go rest, father-to-be." The door closed. Darren stood in the corridor as if abandoned in a dream. When he returned, his house was silent except for Selah's soft weeping. The travelers waited near the courtyard. Mara sat rigid by the oven, staring at her hands. Elin had curled into herself against the wall like a child hiding from thunder. Darren could not meet their eyes. "They would not come," he said. The smaller of the 2 messengers nodded once, as though this also had been expected. "Dawn is near. When the first light comes, you must flee." No one slept. The hours crept with unbearable slowness. Outside, the city settled again into uncanny stillness. Whatever blindness had struck the crowd sent them at last stumbling home, muttering and cursing into the dark. Far away a dog barked. Somewhere temple bells marked the passing watch. Darren sat with his back against the door he had failed to defend and listened to his family breathe. Once, near the blackest hour before dawn, Mara spoke without lifting her head. "Did you mean it?" No one answered at first. She raised her eyes to Darren. They were not angry. Anger would have been easier. They were broken and searching. "When you offered us. Did you mean it?" Darren felt something tear inside him. "I was afraid. That is not what I asked." He bowed his head. For a moment, he whispered, "I did." Selah shut her eyes. Elin began to cry silently. Mara stared at him a long time, then turned away. The first gray line of dawn had only begun to touch the sky when the messengers rose with sudden urgency. "Up," said the taller one. "There is no more time." Selah moved as if in a trance, gathering a shawl, a water skin, a pouch of bread. Elin took nothing. Mara slipped a small knife into her sleeve and bound her sandals with trembling fingers. Darren stood frozen in the courtyard, looking around the house he had built beam by beam, fig tree, lamps, jars, woven mats, the niche where the girl's heights had been marked on the wall in charcoal. These absurd things rooted him more fiercely than fear ever had. "We cannot leave all of it," Selah said, suddenly wild. "The silver buried under the hearthstone. My mother's bracelets. The cedar chest. It will burn," the messenger said. Selah clutched the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "Then let me take." "No." Darren hesitated. That instant nearly killed them all. The messengers crossed the room, seized him and his family by the wrists, and pulled them bodily through the house, through the door, into the paling street. Their grip was like iron and mercy at once. Neretza at dawn looked innocent. Smoke rose from a few cook fires. The eastern sky was pearl gray. Swallows turned over the roofs. A woman was drawing water 2 alleys away. Somewhere a baker had already lit his ovens. A donkey brayed. How easily the world disguises its last hour. They hurried through the gate and out upon the plain. Only when the city walls lay behind them did the taller messenger release Darren's arm. "Run," he said. "Do not stop in the valley. Do not turn back. Flee to the high ridges." Darren stared toward the mountains, blue and distant against the whitening sky. They were far. Selah was not strong. Elin's sandals were already slipping. Mara had not spoken since the question in the night. Panic clawed at him, practical and cowardly at once. "There is a town nearer," he said, pointing southeast. "Belair, the small one by the low hill. Let us flee there. We cannot reach the heights before the fire comes." The messenger's gaze went to the little town, barely visible in the morning haze. "So be it," he said at last. "But hasten. Nothing will begin until you reach it." Then the two were gone. Darren did not see them depart. One moment they stood in the road, pale against the morning. The next there was only wind moving through the dry grass. They ran. The valley plain, which had always seemed broad and beautiful from the terraces of Neretza, revealed itself underfoot as pitiless distance. The soil was cracked in places, lush in others, striped with irrigation channels and low stone boundaries. Vineyards stretched in orderly rows. Date palms trembled near the streams. Beyond them lay the sister city of Vayam, still sleeping in the sunrise. Behind Darren, Neretza gleamed. Selah sobbed as she ran, not from weakness alone but from the pain of tearing oneself from all that one has arranged one's life around. She had loved this valley once. Even after its ugliness had shown itself, she loved the little rituals it gave her, bargaining in the spice court, hanging linen on the roof, choosing ribbons for the girls, listening to temple singers drifting across the city at evening. She had built meaning out of small domestic things because the larger world had never been kind. "Faster," Darren urged. Elin stumbled. Mara caught her. "I can't," Elin gasped. "You must." The sun edged above the horizon. Light spilled gold across the fields. Birds rose from reeds in frightened clouds, though no visible predator stirred among them. A strange heaviness entered the air, as if the whole plain were holding its breath. They reached the low rise outside Belair just as the town's first gatekeeper unbarred the entry. The old man squinted at them in surprise. "You look like death has chased you." "It has," Mara said. They passed inside. Belair was no more than a cluster of mud brick houses around a central well, too small to deserve conquest and too poor to inspire pride. Goats slept beneath carts. Children still rubbed sleep from their eyes. No one yet knew that this little town had been spared by a plea spoken on the run. The moment Darren crossed its threshold, the world broke. It began with a sound, deep, impossible, like mountains grinding together beneath the earth. Every dog in Bel Air set up a frantic howl. Pots trembled on shelves. The ground underfoot shuddered. Then came the light. Not lightning. Not sunrise. A white-red glare burst over the valley behind them, so fierce that shadows vanished. Darren turned instinctively and threw up an arm. Neretza was no longer a city. It was a furnace open to the sky. Fire rained. From the heavens or from some wound in the earth he could not tell, but burning stones and streams of sulfur fell upon Neretza and Vayam and the whole lush plain between. Towers shattered. Roofs vanished in sheets of flame. Gardens blackened instantly. Smoke surged upward in coiling pillars so thick and dark they blotted the morning. The sound of it was beyond screaming, though screams were in it. The plain convulsed. Fields split open in lines of fire. Water channels hissed into steam. Trees flashed into torches. The smell struck them a heartbeat later: sulfur, burning pitch, scorched flesh, the bitter breath of the deep places of the world. Elin collapsed to her knees, covering her ears. Mara stared in horror, face lit by reflected ruin. Selah stopped walking. Darren did not notice at first. He was transfixed by the destruction, by the knowledge that Tuvan and Asher were in it, that neighbors were in it, that servants and children and market women and old men and laughing boys were being erased from the earth in a single blazing sentence. Then he felt her hand slip from his. He turned. Selah had gone several paces back toward the gate. Not far. Just enough to stand alone in the dusty road, outlined against the inferno. Her face was wet, not with sweat but with tears. She was looking not at the fire itself, but at what it contained. Home. Her jars. Her cedar chest. Her folded linens. The fig tree in the court. The girl's height marks on the wall. The silver beneath the hearth. The rooms where years had settled into habit. All the vanities and all the tenderness. Everything that had made endurance possible. Selah. Darren shouted. Don't. She did not move. Perhaps she meant only to look once. Perhaps she thought grief had earned her that much. Perhaps no human heart can flee utterly without trying to take one last sight of what it loses. The firelight struck her. And she changed. It happened with unnatural swiftness but terrible clarity. Her body stiffened, her mouth opened as if to speak Darren's name, and a white crust flashed across her skin like frost racing over winter water. In an instant flesh became mineral, tears became glittering beads, hair became wind-carved salt. She stood rigid where she had stopped, a woman-shaped pillar pale against the red ruin. Elin screamed. Darren ran to Selah and seized her shoulders, but they were hard and cold. The shape of her face remained, and yet it was no longer a face. Salt flaked beneath his hands. He fell back choking on grief so huge it made no sound at first. Mara came and gripped his arms. Father. Father. He clawed at the pillar as though he might dig her back out of it. The surface crumbled under his fingers. White dust clung to his skin. The likeness of Selah's cheek collapsed. Her shoulder fractured. The more he touched, the more he destroyed the last form of her. At last Mara dragged him away while Elin sobbed in the road. Behind them the valley burned all morning. No one in Bel Air ventured near the gate. The townspeople huddled in courtyards and on roofs, staring westward in mute terror as black smoke climbed and climbed, thick as storm clouds and lit from beneath by the angry red of things still falling. By noon, nothing recognizable remained of Neretza or Vayam except smoldering outlines and the skeletons of towers. Darren sat against Bel Air's wall with salt crust still under his fingernails and did not speak. Mara tended Elin, who shook as if with fever. They had lost their mother, their betrothed, their home, their city, their certainty that obedience protects the innocent from sorrow. They had also lost something harder to name, the shape of their father as they once knew him. The man who had nearly given them to the mob and failed to save their mother could not be returned by survival. Near sunset, a traveler passing eastward told of another man seen in the hills at dawn, standing on a ridge above the valley and watching the smoke rise like a furnace. Darren knew without asking who that man was, his uncle Saren, the one who had warned him years ago that prosperity among corrupt men is a thin shelter against ruin. Darren wondered whether Saren prayed for him still. They remained in Belair 3 days. The little town did not welcome them but dared not turn them away, for all had seen what spared Belair might also destroy it. Bread was given reluctantly, water in measured portions, a corner of a stable for sleeping. Every kindness carried fear. On the 4th day Darren said, "We cannot stay." Mara looked up from braiding Elan's hair. Then where? The hills. It was what the messengers had first commanded, and what he had begged to avoid. There are many tragedies in this world. One of the sharpest is to survive long enough to understand where obedience would have hurt less than compromise. They left Belair before dawn and climbed the eastern ridges. The path was narrow, strewn with shale and thorn. Below them the valley lay scarred black and white. What had been green was now ash. Where rivers once glinted, only streaks of mineral brightness remained. Here and there white pillars jutted from the plain like grave markers of a world judged and abandoned. Elan refused to look down. In the hills they found caves used by shepherds in the wet season and made shelter there. The nights were cold. Food was scarce. Darren bartered the last of his rings for dried meat and barley from passing herdsmen. Often he went alone to gather roots or set snares, returning with little. He seemed to age by the day. His beard whitened. His shoulders bowed. Sometimes the girls woke in the dark to hear him whispering apologies to Selah, to them, to God, to the dead. Mara grew hard where once she had been merely strong. She no longer waited for comfort from others. She found water in rock hollows, mended sandals with strips torn from old cloaks, and kept Elan warm when the mountain wind screamed at the cave mouth. Yet beneath that hardness lived a tenderness made more painful by everything around it. She remembered her mother's hands oiling her hair. She remembered Tuvan laughing under lantern light. She remembered the way Neretza smelled after rain before she learned what evil lived there. Elan changed differently. She became quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the hush of someone listening for a sound that has already ended. She would sit at the edge of the slope and watch vultures wheel over the valley. Once Mara found her tracing lines in the dust, the floor plan of their old house from memory. "Don't," Mara said sharply. Elan rubbed it out at once. Weeks passed. The tragedy of fire became the tragedy of aftermath. Hunger, silence, accusation without words. There are calamities that kill in an hour and then go on killing in the minds of those left behind. One evening, when the moon hung thin above the hills, Elan asked in a voice so small Darren almost missed it, "Did Mother suffer?" No one answered for a long while. Finally Darren said, "Only for a moment." He did not know if it was true. He offered it because love sometimes takes the form of a lie too gentle to challenge. Mara sat near the cave entrance, sharpening her knife on stone. She suffered before that. Darren flinched. Mara did not look at him. We all did. He bowed his head. "I know." "No," she said. "You know now. That is not the same." The knife rasped again against stone. At last Darren rose and walked out beneath the stars. He stood there a long time, a solitary figure on the mountainside above a dead valley. Mara watched him until he became only outline and shadow. "Do you hate him?" Elan whispered. Mara kept her eyes on the dark. "Some days. And other days?" Mara's grip loosened on the knife. "Other days I remember that he ran into the city for us. That he wept for Mother. That fear can turn people into strangers even to themselves. She swallowed. Other days I hate what fear made of him. Elin leaned against her sister's shoulder. When winter came early to the heights, Darren fell ill. The cough took him first, then fever, then a weakness that hollowed him from within. Mara brewed bitter roots, fed him broth in spoonfuls, covered him with every blanket they had, but the strength had been going out of him since the morning the valley burned. On the last night he beckoned them close. The cave was cold. Outside, wind moved like a living thing among the rocks. I wanted, he said, pausing often for breath, to build a safe life. That is how ruin begins sometimes. Not with hatred. With wanting comfort too much. His eyes, dim in the firelight, moved from Mara to Elin. I chose a fertile valley and did not flee when its wickedness became plain. I told myself I could remain clean inside unclean walls. I told myself I could protect what was mine by making peace with evil. And when terror came to my own door, I proved what had been growing in me all along. His voice broke. Mara felt tears sting, unwanted and fierce. I cannot ask you to forget, he whispered. Only this, do not build your lives where your souls must learn to bargain with darkness. Better a hard mountain and an honest hunger than rich bread bought with silence. Elin began to cry softly. Darren reached with trembling fingers and touched their hands. Your mother loved you. That is the truest thing I can leave you. Before dawn he died. They buried him on a slope facing east, where the sun would touch the grave before it reached the valley below. Mara marked the place with 3 upright stones. Elin left a strip of her mother's blue shawl tied to the tallest one, and it fluttered in the cold wind like a frail, stubborn memory. Afterward the sisters stood together and looked down at the ruined plain. Years later, travelers would still speak of that valley with fear. They would tell of white pillars in the salt flats and black glass where vineyards had stood, and of a city destroyed for its cruelty in a single day. They would say judgment had fallen there like fire from the hand of God. What they would not tell, because cities always swallow the quieter sorrows, was how tragedy truly lingers. It lingers in daughters carrying water up a mountain because they no longer trust valleys. It lingers in the empty shape beside a hearth where a woman once folded linen. It lingers in a father's last understanding arriving too late to mend what fear broke. It lingers in remembering the beautiful face of corruption and the price of loving it. Mara and Elin did not remain in the caves forever. When spring softened the hills, they followed shepherd trails north until they came to high country where small villages clung to terraced slopes. There they worked first as gleaners, then as weavers. They spoke little of where they had come from. People noticed only that one sister was stern and watchful, the other gentle and silent, and that both looked west with pain whenever the sky at sunset turned the color of fire. In time, Elin learned again to laugh, though it always carried ache inside it. Mara never became soft, but she became just. Those who dealt with her in trade found her unwavering, incapable of the small corruptions by which communities decay. She would walk away from profit rather than lie. She would share bread rather than flatter the powerful. When asked why, she would only say, I have seen what grows from tolerated wickedness. Some evenings the sisters climbed above their village to watch the light fade over distant lands. On very clear days, far to the southwest, there was a pale glimmer on the horizon where the dead valley lay, like a scar catching sun. Once, many years after the burning, Elin asked, do you think Mother looked back because she loved the city? Mara was quiet a long time. No, she said at last. I think she looked back because she was human. They stood together in the wind, 2 survivors carrying a grief that had changed shape but never left. Below them the mountain village kindled its evening lamps one by one. Children called to each other in narrow lanes. Somewhere a woman sang while kneading bread. Somewhere a man came home tired and honest from the terraces. Small sounds. Fragile sounds. The sounds of lives not yet given over to rot. Mara closed her eyes and listened. Not all tragedies end in fire. Some end in salt, in memory, in the long labor of choosing a different life after ruin. Some leave behind not triumph, but a harder mercy, the chance to build again with eyes opened. Night settled over the hills. Far away, in the place where Neretza had stood, no lamp answered the dark.